Hey everybody, Jack Loves Painting here. Gonna be working on a new project. This is the BloodBowl Dwarf team. So I got our runner here and his base. One thing I'm doing for these bases is I decided to magnetize all the balls so that if somebody picks up a ball, just pop it right on there with the magnet. Super easy. We're gonna start off with our red-brown primer from Stynylrez because there's going to be a tan component of this uniform's color scheme, and most of the time when I airbrush stuff I look at the model and I decide what's going to be the hardest color to hand paint, and that's usually what I try to airbrush. And we're only going to be airbrushing our base coat for this project because I've had some people ask me about doing more hand painting tutorials, because not everybody has an airbrush. So if you don't have an airbrush, just kind of pretend that I used a rattle can spray can for our primer and our base coat on our dude. So our base coat is going to be a paint from Scale75 called Iroko. It's kind of a light tan, like sandy khaki color that we're going to be using for our tan color scheme on parts of his armor, things like that. So this is just what we're airbrushing. It'll basically be the only thing that we're going to airbrush other than our varnishes. Just gonna get that knocked out. It goes on pretty wet because the Iroko needs to be thinned down quite a bit to cover correctly. And then we're just gonna hit our base with some mahogany brown. Again, this is kind of the only real airbrush stuff that we're doing. I'm going to be hitting it with some secret weapon handle wood, which you don't really need to do with the airbrush. I'm just doing it because it's easy and I got it out. I'm just going to be hitting kind of the perimeter of our dirt, and you could do this with a paintbrush or a dry brush depending on what you want to do. For our first color on the uniform, we're going with dark Prussian blue from Model Color, and we're just going to be hitting the pants and his shirt, things like that, with our dark Prussian blue as kind of a base coat. So we're just going around the model. When you're doing this, just try to be as careful as possible. You can see that I'm taking my time working around some of these leather straps and armor plates that we want to keep as a tan color for right now, and we're just going to hit basically anywhere that we want to be blue. So you can see here that we've got the pants and the shirt with the sleeves and all that blocked in. Now we're going to go to flat brown, and we're going to do this for all of the leather. So he's got this kind of like armored like vest harness kind of thing on his torso, as well as a belt. And the straps for his knee pads are going to be hitting with our flat brown base in that end. Alright, here he is. We got all of our flat brown leather stuff blocked in. You can see that kind of harness that he's wearing. Now we're going to go to Cardic Flesh from P3. We're going to be hitting all of the exposed flesh parts. So basically it's like his elbows, his hands, and the small part of his face. Not a whole lot of flesh tone on this guy, which is kind of nice because I don't personally like hand painting flesh tone. I usually try to airbrush it where I can. But for this guy, since the stuff is so small, it's not much of an issue. So we're just going to be blocking that in. Take care to make sure that you're putting on your flesh really thin, because a lot of flesh paints tend to get kind of chunky if you try to put it on there too thick or try to force it to lay down when it doesn't want to. So just take your time do a couple of thin coats, and it should work out just fine. And especially on your faces, you want to make sure that you're going really thin. Like, be patient when you're working on faces, because a lot of times the detail on faces is super shallow. So if you put your paint down too thick, then you can lose a lot of that detail. Okay, now we're switching to our model color black, and we're going to be working on his beard. He's got a big old beard because he's a dwarf, covering up most of his face and chest, so just blocking that in with some model color black. It's a really nice satiny black that paints really easy. That's why I love using it. So we're just going to be blocking in his beard there, getting all that, making sure to take care where the sculpt kind of butts up against some of our other colors. Put it on there really nice and clean. One thing that I think I forgot to do when I was working on the beard was to hit the soles of his shoes, giving him some black rubber soles on his football cleats there. You'll see that just kind of like appear later in the video because I forgot to do it right this second, but did it later. It's the same color. Just so there's no confusion on that point. Okay, so now we're going to switch to neutral gray for model color, really nice kind of medium mid-tone gray, and I'm going to be blocking in some of the parts of his uniform that are going to end up being white, because our color scheme is white and tan and blue. So I'm hitting his shoe right here. We're going to hit the sides and back of the shoe, kind of where the soft section of the shoe would be, as well as the little top thing. I think you call it a tongue on shoes, the little thing that goes in front of your ankle on top of your foot there. So here he is with the knee pads and the shoulder pads and parts of his helmet, that kind of thing, blocked in with the gray there. And then we're going to focus on our metallics with some Negro gold from Scale75. I think all I'm doing for this guy is going to be the little bracers that he's got on his arms, the top of his helmet, and the little kind of metal fetishes that he's got woven into his beard. Just going to block those in nice and clean. Alright, now we're going to go to charred brown, and we'll be using this for the football that he's got under one arm. This is going to take a couple of coats because charred brown is a pre-thinned airbrush paint from Vallejo Game Air, and sometimes it can be a little tricky to hand paint with this because it is that kind of pre-thinned nature. One thing that I like to do when working with these air paints with a hand brush is put a couple of drops of flow improver in there when I put it on the palette. That'll give it a little bit more body and help it react similarly to a like a normal paint, because those pre-thinned airbrush paints can be kind of weird if you're not airbrushing with them. Right, and from this point, we're just going to hit it with a gloss varnish because this is where we're going to put our wash on, and I want our wash to be fairly clean. So I'm just going to hit the whole model with a coat of our gloss varnish from Vallejo. I'm using the airbrush here, but you can definitely use a rattle can if desired. And for mixing our wash, we're using the Army Painter system. So I've got our Quickshade wash mixed medium, some strong tone, which is a brown, and a dark tone, which is kind of a black wash, similar to Nuln Oil. Just gonna mix those all up, and it's gonna help our wash go on nice and clean with that Quickshade mixed medium and the gloss varnish. Just gonna be putting that all over the mini, And one thing you want to remember when you're working with this stuff, if you're using a gloss varnish, is that that wash does not want to sit still. It wants to flow all over and try to work its way into the recesses. So a lot of that is going to kind of flow down and drip to the lowest points of the model. So you can see me kind of wicking away some of that excess wash from our flat areas and kind of on his feet where it's flowing down and pooling up. So when you're doing this, you want to make sure that as it's drying, you work quickly and wick some of that excess wash away so that you don't have big huge stains on the lowest parts of the model. And we're just going to use this on our base as well. Just put it right over the cork that we have on the base there. Get all of that nice pumice texture picked out. Alright, here he is post-wash. And we're going to hit him with a matte varnish from Vallejo. Again, I'm using the airbrush, but you can definitely use a Rattlecam product to accomplish the same effect if you don't have an airbrush. Since we're doing kind of a airbrush, less airbrush non-exclusive tutorial today. And this is just gonna get rid of that gloss. It's gonna uniform all of those different paints because we used a couple of different brands of paints, so they're gonna have different finishes. So here he is. And we're gonna start our highlights. So for the pants and the uniform, we're gonna use Prussian Blue, which is a mid-tone blue, a little bit brighter than our dark Prussian Blue. And just go in there and highlight. Doing this kind of quickly because this is kind of a hand paint tutorial where I'm showing you guys how to get this stuff on the table really quick and easily. So I'm using kind of a sketchy, sort of cartoony highlight technique where I'm just hitting the hard surfaces, doing lots of little parallel strokes with the brush to knock in our highlights. So it's going to get that kind of comic booky, cartoony, whatever you want to call it, look to it. Alright, so here he is, and then we're going to do our third highlight with some model color blue green, and I'm just going to use this to go in and pick out the little creases and detail highlights on the pants there, and you can see I'm using that very sketchy method of highlighting really quickly, just cutting in those details, creating some extra textures on the pants there with some little hash marks. And one thing I'm going to do is thin out our paint even more than I had doing this to do some little cloth texture-y stuff, like some little scratchies and things like that, to show that, you know, he's kind of a rough and tumble Blood Bowl player. We're going to be doing that technique on a couple of other places throughout the model as well, to give him a little bit of personality, some weathering, some wear and tear, that kind of thing. Okay, so now we're going to go to Iroko again, and we're going to be basing over the areas that we want to have that nice Iroko tan color. So like these armor pieces on a couple of spots in the model, just getting those cleaned up. And again, Iroko is a little bit of a tricky paint, so I use it extra thin and just do multiple coats until it gets nice and solid, because we just want these kind of bright tan leather areas, like these, I kind of think of it as like hard boiled leather for the little shoulder pad and knee pad and the toe caps on his cleats there. So I just want it to be nice and clean from the wash. That's just what we're doing. We're leaving our recesses shaded but covering over it. And to highlight that, we're going to use some yellow ochre, and I'm just going to be cutting in some details, doing some kind of large fat edge highlights with the yellow ochre. So it's a little subtle to start off because yellow ochre and Iroko are fairly similar, but it's just going to help us cut in those details a little bit. And when you do this technique with those really subtle colors under the really nice lights that you have at home, and then take it to the game store or wherever you're going to be playing under not as good lighting, where it's a little darker and less reflective on that paint, it's going to show up more. So you can see here, like, I've got all three of my nice studio lights on, and when I cut one of them off, you can see the details cutting out a bit more. And for our final edge highlight, we're going to go to Buff for model color. It's a little bit lighter than Yellow Ochre, kind of a cream color, and we're just going to reinforce those little highlights with some skinnier, more detail edge highlights to really pop the detail out. So I'm hitting where I think the highlight would be brightest, like the toes of the cleats and some of the hard edges on the knee pad and the shoulder pad there. Next, we're going to highlight up our grays because they're going to end up being kind of an off-white. So we're going to Celestra Grey from Citadel, and I'm going to be doing the same thing that I was doing with Oroco, where basically I'm covering up all of the dirty areas from the wash and only leaving the recesses shaded to be nice and clean on those big flat areas. So you can see here I'm working on a shoe, just cutting in the areas of gray right there that I want to end up being white. Celestra Grey covers really, really nicely. It's one of the few Citadel paints that I still use a lot. And so we're just going to cut in the detail on all of the grays. And on camera, it already looks kind of white. That's just because the paint is super wet and reflective under our studio lights there. So when we go to Ulthuan Grey from Citadel, it's going to get even brighter. And if you don't want to go past this step, you don't have to. Like, Ulthuan Grey is such a bright gray that a lot of times it'll read like white to the human eye. So we're just gonna cut those details in a little bit more, kind of highlight them up with the Ulthuan Grey, and then do an extra highlight. So this is a Hobo White from Slowfusegaming. It's a custom mixed color that he sells on his website there. And basically what we're gonna do with Hobo White is thin it out to kind of a glaze, and just glaze over some of the parts that we have, the Ulthuan Grey, and do some little edge highlights and stuff like that to really make it pop. So that pure white is gonna be almost glow to your eye because it's so bright. And that's why I'm just kind of picking out the details a little bit more with this glaze of pure white. It's really gonna make the uniform pop. Alright, now we're going to highlight up our golds. This is Elven Gold from Scale75, super shiny gold, so it's going to go right over our Negro gold and really shine things up. So I'm not going to be focusing on everything, we're just going to focus on picking out some of the details on our gold to give us some contrast between the really dark gold and the super bright gold. So you can see I'm just picking out these little raised edges and stuff like that on our gold pieces, picking out the detail on our little buckles and the little gold fetishes he's got woven into his beard, so they pop out a little bit more. Alright, we're going to go back to Mahogany Brown and highlight up all of the little leather straps and stuff that we blocked in earlier. And this is kind of where I'm going to leave it, because this Blood Bowl model is one of the Games Workshop kind of easy to build, like easy to put together models. And if you've ever worked with those, you know that sometimes the detail on those can be kind of shallow or warped a little bit because of the way they make the easy to build sprues. So I don't want to put too much more paint on these straps. We're going to start losing detail definition. So I'm just kind of cutting in our little edge highlights with this Mahogany Brown. And with all the other colors being highlighted up around it and the wash and all that, you don't really have to do a whole lot of work to get the stuff to really pop out. So this is all you really need. So now we're gonna work on our flesh tone. So this is Barbarian Flesh from Army Painter. It's much brighter than Cardic Flesh. And I'm just gonna use this kind of as like a little detail highlight and cut in some of the detail on our skin here because there's not a whole lot of it. And again, since we're working with these like easy to build Games Workshop models, the detail is super shallow, and I don't want to sit here working with 3 or 4 different flesh tones to get, you know, a super realistic flesh tone. We're trying to get this model out super quick and look good at the same time. So I'm just going to be cutting in those details with the Barbarian Flesh and just kind of leave it at that. And it ends up looking really good without having to do a whole lot of work. Okay, going back to Neutral Grey, and we're going to be using our Slowfusegaming utility dry brush. This is the chisel tip dry brush. You guys know how much I love this. Definitely go over to slowfusegaming.com and check it out because it's a game changer. I love this dry brush. And we're just going to be using it to hit our beard there. And you can see with that chisel tip, like I can get right in there with that dry brush and I don't have to worry about getting gray paint dry brush on any other part of the model. I can just hit that beard like right in the middle of all that detail and not even worry about it. And then we're gonna dry brush some Mahogany Brown very lightly over different parts of the model and just kind of dirty him up a little bit. Again, he's a Blood Bowl player. He's rough and tumble. You know, he's been on the ground a number of times, so he's not going to be pristine. He's not going to be, you know, fresh off of the sideline clean for the purposes of this model. We're just going to dirty him up a little bit by using this dry brush to give him some dust on his clean uniform. Okay, now we're going to pull out our model color black and do some freehand for our numbers. And one thing when you're freehanding stuff, you want to keep that brush angle as close to a 90 degrees as possible because it's really easy to control your brush pressure when it's like that. And it makes freehanding stuff a lot simpler. So we're just going to cut those numbers in nice and clean. Alright, we're going to bust out the Iroko one more time and dry brush our base to pick out all of that pumice texture, get our dirt exactly where we need it to be. Just going to go all over. And then we're going to put on our grass. This is from gamergrass.com. Just going to pull these tufts out and super glue them to the base. Not covering everything, just the majority of the base to give it kind of a hard scrapple football field look. And then one thing that I'm going to do is use our little dry brush with some of our hobo white to kind of cut in our little football field lines. Not pristine and perfect. Again, I want this field to look well used and kind of messed up because it is Blood Bowl. And then we're going to paint the rim of our base with some model color black. I always go with black rims on the base because it just makes the base pop a little bit more from a composition standpoint and it just looks a little cleaner. Honestly, you can do whatever you want, but if you ask me what color to paint the rim of a base, 100% of the time I will tell you black because I just think it looks the best. And then we're going to cover the model with a coat of matte varnish just to protect him because Blood Bowl is one of those games where you're constantly laying down your miniatures for different effects, so I want to make sure that our paint is nice and protected and to give us a uniform finish. Alright, here he is, all done on his base. You can see there he is a really good looking dwarf player for Blood Bowl, and you can see our little ball there is magnetized to the base and will not fall off. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. This team is called the Gallic Gunners, and I'll show you why in a minute. Here is the star player for the team, Grombrindle the White Dwarf, and we've taken to calling him Old Man Vegeta, so if a model has Super Saiyan hair, you know I'm going to paint it like a Super Saiyan. And this guy is painted up to a little bit of a higher standard because we painted him on Twitch, so if you want to see more tutorials to kind of a higher standard, less quick tutorials, make sure to check me out on Twitch. We stream over there 4 nights a week, and you can find the link in the description below. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will see you next time.